Hello guys, and welcome to part 3 of me building the Blackbird Models Avro Manchester conversion for the Airfix 1/72 scale Lancaster. In the first video I spent quite a lot of time going through this wing leader photo archive for the Manchester, looking at all the details and the different versions and so on. In the last video I decided that I'd be making what I described as a later Mark I Manchester, with the 33-foot tailplane, the third fin, the short tail fins and the top turret. I started with the plastic surgery in that video, chopping off the Lancaster wings and getting the resin Manchester wings attached. And this is how we left things at the end of that last video. In this video we're going to finish off the details and get this thing painted. So with the wings done, I moved to the tailplane. I spent a little bit of time getting the resin kit short tailplane working and fitting before remembering that I decided not to use that and I'd be using the kit tailplane instead. But anyway, oh well. Anyway, I built up the kit tailplane. My experience of building a couple of these Airfix Lancasters tells me that although the instructions assure you that you can put the tailplane in later on, it's really best to do it now, because it's quite hard to get these tabs here, as you can see, lined up. It's quite a nice little system and it keeps them in place. In fact, you can put them in without any glue and they stay perfectly horizontal really well, but you do need to put them in now. The first Airfix Lancaster I built, I didn't do that, and I ended up cracking the seam down the fuselage trying to get it in place. Now of course, one schoolboy error that I've made here is I've glued the fuselage together, sanded everything nice and smooth, and I forgot to make a slot for the third fin. And of course, because that slot needs to go in the centre of the fuselage, right where the seam is between the two kit pieces, I had to be very careful here because obviously I don't want to crack that entire seam. The easiest thing I found was to drill a series of small holes where the slot should go and then use my hobby knife to join them together. And with a bit of finagling and a bit of sanding, that turned out okay. Next up was quite a lot of clean up and filling. Here is the part wing where the resin piece attaches to the kit piece, the plastic piece. This gap here I am absolutely sure is my fault. I know exactly what I've done here, and to fix it I just simply used quite a lot of putty. I do like this Vallejo water soluble putty, but I do find it shrinks a bit when it dries. And it doesn't sand super well either. When you sand it, it tends to pull up big chunks of it, I find. So that's why you can see me here applying it, leaving it to dry for 30 seconds or so, and then just wiping away any excess. And of course I'm careful there not to get too much putty in the panel lines. We get resin flaps in the Blackbird kit, but there doesn't seem to be a recess there for that notch to go into. So if you want them closed, essentially you need to cut off that notch so that they'll be flush with the trailing edge of the wing. Next up was the notorious Airfix Bombay doors. If yours are a little bit warped, consider yourself lucky because most of them are massively warped. This particular set wasn't too bad. I found, having built several of these, that the best thing to do is to get the arms in at one end to give a rough idea of where those doors should go, and then don't even bother trying to glue all the attachment points at once. Glue one, or if you're feeling lucky, two, closest to the front, in this case closest to the nose. Get those in position, get a really good bond on that, and then gradually, literally one a day or one every few hours when the glue started to dry properly, do one more attachment point, working your way backwards. Here I've done that, and you can see with a little bit of tape there to hold the doors evenly so they're not leaning over to one side or the other. I've got that fairly okay. They're not quite equally open, but it's the best I can do, to be quite honest. The wing leader book does have a couple of shots of the Manchester Bombays, including these here on page 32 and 33. If these bombs look slightly unusual to you, maybe a bit too long, it's because they're armour-piercing bombs designed for anti-ship missions. We also get this shot here on page 45, which makes me think that the attachment points for the bombs are similar to the Lancasters, so I simply used the one straight out of the kit. The wheel bay doors are supplied as a single piece, which you need to cut in two if you want to have the gear down, which I do. It was quite hard to find images, even in the wing leader books, of the gear bay doors and how they attach, so I did have to use a little bit of guesswork there. I think the turrets were the most fiddly and probably least well done section of this conversion. The only thing that the Blackbird kit provides for the turrets is the glazing, and it asks us to use the kit parts, but as you can see here they don't really fit. That's understandable to an extent. The turret would be a small space anyway, and the scale thickness of the clear parts reduces that even further. But basically, the approach I had to go for was not to put anything inside the turret. And because there are no openings in the clear parts, rather than drilling them and putting the machine guns through, in the end I simply stuck the barrels to the clear parts. Probably not the best approach, but I was a bit worried about drilling a hole in the clear part and ending up cracking it. This is the Airfix tail turret part, and as you can see the one supplied in the kit is a slightly different shape, but unfortunately one of those shell casing chutes has been damaged. However, the supplied clear part doesn't really fit onto the Airfix piece, so my solution was to break off the rest of that broken chute and replace it with some styrene sheet. The Airfix kit provides the later anti-shimmy type rear wheel, tail wheel, which I don't think is correct for the Manchester, so I stole this other wheel here from one of my Revell Lancasters, which appears to have the regular type wheel. I'll replace that with something else later on. The Manchester exhausts come on 2 blocks of 4, like so, and they need to be superglued to the nacelles. If we look at the wing leader book, I believe the exhausts supplied here are the earlier type, as you can see in this image of the prototype Manchester. You can see they're quite small. This Mark I L7279 has the same small exhausts, but if we look at the aircraft that I'm building, you can see that it has these large flame dampeners over those exhausts. These are not included in the Blackbird kit. I could fairly easily make these, I suppose, out of some kind of styrene or perhaps from 3D printing, but I decided just to go with the kit parts. It's a little inaccurate, but I'm happy with it. At this point I gave the Manchester a coat of grey primer. This was Halford's car primer, and I went for a good old panel line pre-shading using XF1 black mixed with XF69 NATO black. While I was doing that pre-shading, I painted the underside and the sides of the fuselage in the same colour. I think this gives a slightly better representation of the RAF Knight than pure black alone. Then of course I had to mask off for the camouflage. All Manchesters were painted in the B camo scheme, which is simply a mirror of the A camouflage scheme which we see most often on things like Lancasters. And again, the wing leader's book has a good artist depiction of that on the inside of the rear cover. I find Tamiya masking sheet much easier to use for this than masking tape, because you can cut out the patterns that you want without having to worry about getting the tape around curves and so on. The squared version is also helpful as it gives you a bit of a guide to the size of your markings. So here I am marking out that wavy fuselage pattern. At this stage I'm only masking off the black, and I'm going to paint the majority of the upper side in RAF dark earth, not worrying if the earth goes where the green should go. Then I can mask off the earth and apply the green to the gaps. And the great thing about this is if I cut this wavy line carefully, I can use 1/2 of the masking tape for each side of the aircraft. It's quite a high demarcation going right above the windows. And here we are ready to receive the dark earth. Here is the Manchester with the dark earth down, and as you can see I've tried to roughly match the pattern of the dark earth. I don't want to be wasting paint on areas that will be covered in green. But if in any doubt, I've always gone for a little bit of overspray, a bit of extra earth, rather than too little. When the dark earth was dry, I masked it over and sprayed everything in RAF dark green. And both of these paints are AK Real colours, which apparently is a range that they're getting rid of, or at least reformulating. And then it was the most satisfying part, which is removing the masking. And while you're watching me do that, I would like to say a huge thank you to my Patreon members and YouTube supporters for their ongoing support. Their names are on the screen now, and I really want you guys to know how much I appreciate your support. It makes a huge difference to me and to the channel, so thank you very much, guys. And there we go. I think that looks pretty decent. I was really happy with this at this stage. A couple of touch-ups required around the cockpit where the blue tack has slightly gone over where it should do and accidentally masked off the paint. But generally speaking, I think that's quite successful. The next job was to put down the markings. To do that, I applied some VMS gloss varnish on the appropriate places. I didn't go for the overall aircraft in gloss, partly because I find it quite difficult to spray the gloss varnish, and I often get a kind of orange peel effect. In terms of the decals, I used a mix of the Airfix Lancaster decals for things like the roundels, and some Kit's World decals that I got from Hannant's ages ago for the letters. And it's times like these when the wing leader books really come in handy. I had a number of questions about the decals, and either the text or the reference images were able to answer all of them. Does the Manchester have the red square to indicate the dinghy compartment like the Lancaster does? Yes, it does. We can see it on these shots here. Does the Manchester have the same trestle markings as the Lancaster on the underside? Yes, it does. We can see the one here on the nose and the ones on the wings and the tail here. Do we have the walkway markings on the top side of the wings like the Lancaster? Yes, we do. We can just make them out on these images here. So overall, really helpful stuff. I did have to be careful with the Airfix walkway markings because they have quite a large area of carrier film between the two black lines, and you do really need to make sure that they're burnished down properly on a nice smooth surface, and that you use lots of decal solution in order to get that sorted. I did cut these a bit shorter as well because of course the Manchester wing is shorter than the Lancasters. Then we have the standard roundels. I haven't shown any video of me putting down the Squadron codes because the decals are super thin and it needed quite a lot of attention quite quickly, and all you would end up seeing would be my hands. I wasn't sure if the fin markings went on both sides of the fin, but again there was a lovely picture inside the wing leader book which confirmed that they do. There's that dinghy location marker that I mentioned earlier. And here we are with Squadron codes and serial numbers down. The whole aircraft was given a coat of VMS matte varnish. I know that satin or semi-gloss might be more accurate for the night paint, but I think for this scale I prefer the matte coat. Unfortunately, when I removed the latex window masks, you can see it's left some areas there around the windows which need touching up. That's not a huge problem, but it is a little bit fiddly, and it makes me think that I should avoid this technique in the future and stick with using masking tape, which worked perfectly well on the turrets and the canopy, as you can see here. I created the Manchester's dual control column using the standard Lancaster control column, a part that I snipped off the Airfix kit, and a piece of brass rod superglued between the two. Then it was a case of sorting out some odds and ends, getting the turrets in place, the dipole aerial on the Bombay door, and a few other bits and pieces. I used Abteilung 502 sepia oil paint, thinned with odourless thinner, as a pin wash on the non-black parts of the aircraft, so the top side basically. It didn't seem to make much difference on the underside, so I didn't apply it there. In terms of cleanup, after the oil paint had dried for about 30 minutes, I took a brush, lightly dampened in odourless thinner, and simply streaked any excess back in the direction of airflow over the wings and the fuselage. I find that does a good job of cleaning up any excess while also adding a slightly grimy effect to the aircraft. The aerial behind the cockpit is quite prominent on the Mark I Manchesters. It seems to be absent on the Mark 1As. I fashioned one out of a piece of thin styrene sheet. The reference photos show some degree of exhaust staining, so I thinned down some Tamiya smoke and lightly airbrushed that in the appropriate places. And with that, my model of the Manchester Mark I L7453 EA-T of 49 Squadron was complete. So there we go guys, that was my build of the Avro Manchester using the Airfix Avro Lancaster base kit and the Blackbird Models resin conversion, all in 1/72 scale. I hope you've enjoyed these 3 videos. I really enjoyed making this kit. I had a lot of fun both reading the Wing Leader Productions book and making the changes to the base Lancaster kit to give me this unusual model. I'm still surprised that nobody's ever made a plastic injection model of the Manchester, but such is life. I had a lot of fun building this. The resin was really easy to work with, and I can't imagine a conversion kit being much easier, to be honest. The fit was excellent, the casting was really good, minimal cleanup required, and overall it produced a really nice result. If I had one criticism, it might be that the instructions in the Blackbird Models kit weren't super clear on what you could and couldn't build in terms of the versions of the Manchester. So as I mentioned previously, we can't build the prototypes for the shorter wings. I suppose that's fairly reasonable. They can't include 2 sets of wings, it would just be too expensive. But it would be nice to have a couple of extras, like for example the larger flame dampeners for the later versions of the Manchester. And also the aerial mast there that you see behind the cockpit is something that I made myself. I scratch built that. That's quite prominent on Manchesters, but it isn't included in the kit. Overall though, I'm really glad that I managed to pick up this kit at Telford last year. It's something I've been after for a while, and whenever you go to Blackbird Models website it seems to be out of stock, but they had plenty of them on the display stand. With that in mind, I might be tempted by one of their Avro Lincoln conversions if I go to Telford this year and if I see one on their stand. Anyway, that's enough of me talking for now. I would like to say thank you to all of you for watching. I really hope you enjoyed these videos. If you have, please do consider leaving a comment below or hitting the like button. I will be back soon with another video. Work is getting a little bit easier at this time of year, so hopefully I shall have a bit more time to get some modelling done. It has been quite hectic over the last month or so. Until then, thank you again for watching, and have fun modelling.